Hello, this is Kara from Kara Tarot, and today I'd like to share something a little different with you. Some of my uh, dream interpretation and possibly paranormal experiences. I have a revamped space in one of the rooms of the house. My brother and sister-in-law came and did a tremendous amount of helping me shift things around, and they did most of the work because of my arm injuries. Um, so I feel that I have a more comfortable space. This bookshelf had been jammed in my room. Most of my furniture from my apartment went either into my bedroom or into a storage trailer here in the woods. So I had a four bedroom apartments worth of furniture basically in my bedroom. So it's been very tight for a very, very long time. So to get this out of there was, especially since I had to add a large dog crate for this girl. She's a very large girl, so I had to add a large dog crate for her. So it gave me more room. I was planning for this, trying to think in terms of a linear progression. I'll start by saying that dream interpretation has always come very easily to me, and I've always had very vivid and varied dreams, very colorful and with lots of guest star appearances. So dream interpretation has always come very easily to me. The first that I recall was sort of paranormal. I'll say that my grandmother died, my father's mother. Stop that. My grandmother died when I was quite young, maybe 6, 7. I'm the only child of my father, and he was the oldest child of my grandmother. So my understanding is that I had a special place in her heart, but that's also because I didn't live there. All the other grandchildren lived there in Texas, and we didn't. So she didn't see much of me. So she, who knows if she would have liked me that much if I'd been there. But we did have a special connection, and she was buried with, I had chosen a cameo pin for her as a present, and she had requested to be buried with that on. So years later, my grandfather was having a major surgery, a major heart surgery that my father was very worried about. And, maybe 4 years later. And I had a really vivid dream that I can still see images from it to this day, where it was nighttime, I was in my bedroom, in a small bedroom, not my bedroom and not the bedroom at my grandparents' house, but I was in a small bedroom in the country, and looking out at nighttime, looking out the window, I saw what I was thinking was a car, a large light, come down the road and turn into the driveway towards the house. As the light turned towards the house and came closer to the house, my attention was shifted to a child's merry-go-round toy that was on a table in the corner. I never had anything like that. And the merry-go-round began spinning, and I was flooded with this feeling of love and warmth and peace and joy, and my grandmother's voice told me, don't worry about him, he'll be with me. So when I woke up, of course, this was a wonderful dream, and I think I told my father about that. I don't remember. I was still too young to remember who I did tell about that. But he did not die from that surgery. But from then on, I felt very much at peace with, I think he died about 4 years after that. The surgery went okay, and then he died later. But I felt such a sense of peace and warmth, and I knew that light and that interaction had been with my grandmother. Probably the next dream that I had then would have been about in my later teens, maybe 16. My grandmother had a lot of, this is my mother's mother now, she had jumped up to help my grandfather at the dining room table and broken her leg. The leg did not reset. She eventually had to have her leg amputated. And I think partially because of that, she and my grandfather lived in a nursing home, maybe a little longer than other people did. But my grandfather lived to an old age. My grandfather lived till he was 98. And yes, my mother is now 101. And no, it doesn't mean that I will live longer, because I've always had health issues, and I don't expect to live that long, and that's fine. But he was very lucid to the end, and as is my mother, very with it mentally. But anyway, one time when my grandmother was ill, my mother went to stay with her, which was very unusual for my mother to be away for more than one night. That probably had a lot to do with my father's need to control her, but that's another thing. But while she was gone, I had a dream in which I was my grandmother, and I was in bed, and I was overwhelmed with a sense of guilt and anxiety and just sorrow for the way I had treated my daughter, who was in real life my mother. As I said, I was inhabiting my grandmother's body in the dream. And my grandmother was still alive. She was just ill. When my mother came back, after things settled down from her returning, I told her, I said, I have to tell you about this dream that I had, and how sorry she is. And when I told her the dream, my mother very uncharacteristically burst out crying. Absolutely broke down and said, oh, but the things she said to me were so horrible. She was so mean to me. So I felt glad that I had relayed the message, because the message was that my grandmother was very bereft, very, very sorry. But that was one of the few times I've seen my mother break down. Now, I'm a crier, and I would usually be greeted with, ugh, what are you crying about now? But as I said, I've had health issues all my life too. So one of the reasons I cry more easily is whenever I'm having breathing issues or any of my other health issues, my emotional stamina is really low, so I cry more. But I'm also a more touchy-feely person. My mother is rather cold. And it's, it takes a lifetime to acknowledge these things not without judgment, but that's just who she is. And it has stood her in good stead through the Depression and World War II and, all of the time periods that she had to live through. So that was the second one that I remember. Now, there were a couple times when I had precognitive feelings. One was again around that time period. We had a horse, and kind of one time when my aunt and my cousins were visiting, my aunt was being really, just out of the blue, was really pushy about she wanted to go riding, and I knew it wasn't a good idea. I think I knew it cognitively, because I knew the horse, but I knew she was a very inexperienced rider, but it was more than that. It's like, I finally said, I don't feel well. I'm not going to go with you. And I don't think you should do it. Well, my aunt was not going to be told no. She fell off the horse and seriously injured her shoulder. It didn't occur to me then. I didn't feel guilty about not going with her because there was absolutely nothing I could have done. She was going to do what she was going to do. And it was just a really immediate confirmation that the feeling that I had had was correct, that we should not have gone. I know there was at least another situation like that, but I'm blanking on it. But I seem to recall that kind of two and two. So, segue into dream interpretation. For those of you who don't understand your dreams, one of the things that I have found in as I said, dream interpretation is very easy for me. But it has to be a conversation, because I can't listen to your dream and just tell you what it means, because I have to know what the elements mean to you. I mean, if you say that you see a white bird flying into your bedroom and depositing something on your desk, I need to know. We'd have to have a discussion. Because I might know what that means for me, but I don't. Do you like birds? Do you like white birds? How do you feel about working at your desk? Is it a desk that you use? You need to understand what those things mean to you. The other thing that I find interesting is, I can't speak for everybody's dreams, because I'm sure everybody's dreams are different. Sidebar, I worked with a woman who, we had nothing in common. She was a co-worker, and we knew we had nothing in common, but we were still friendly enough. And one time I told her about one of my dreams, which is, my dreams are kaleidoscopic. And she said, "Oh, your dreams are really weird." And I said, "What do you dream about?" And she said, "I dream about going home and cooking dinner and cleaning the house." And I was like, oh my God. I would shoot myself if that were my dream world. Because the real world is lousy enough to have to fall asleep and do the same thing. And And she thought that that was normal. And it was also interesting because she talked about food all the time. And she also always talked about her weight problems. And I always thought to myself, I know why you can't lose weight, because you're constantly talking about food. And you're constantly talking about food and food preparation and cooking. And it's like, you can't lose weight that way. Um, um, the other aspect of interpreting dreams for me is just because the way a person appears in your dream isn't who that person necessarily is. I've had a dream where, like I always say, I have guest stars in my dreams, and they're not always movie stars, but when they are, it's really obvious that that's not who it is. I had a dream about my cousin, where my cousin was played by Lupita Nyong'o. I mean, clearly not my cousin, and yet in my dream, I understood that that was my cousin. And so I knew that interaction that I was having with her was about my cousin. That would have been an instance where if my relationship with my cousin were different, I would have told her about that dream. Not because of the Lupita Nyong'o part, but because the information in the dream might have been useful to her, but I knew she wouldn't understand it or take it from me. And it's similarly, I've had other dreams where my uncle was played by, I'm blanking on his name now, a movie star. My uncle was played by some movie star, and I knew it wasn't the movie star. I knew it was my uncle in the dream. But it's just like, if you looked at him, it looked like this movie star. And so those are things that you have to parse out, is that just because something appears in your dream, it isn't necessarily mean that you're dreaming about that person. It doesn't, without giving any names, I talked to a man who had a dream about a young woman who he had met in passing, and he had seen her 8x10 or something for some project, some music project or theater project, and he wanted me to help him figure out the dream. And I said, okay, so what does she mean to you? You know, and what we isolated is, he didn't like, hadn't been thinking about her and thinking he wanted to have an affair. It was nothing like that. She represented youth to him. She represented that beginning of a career to him. So once we figured that out, and the other aspect of the dream had to do with his wife, the thing with his wife fell into place once we figured out that this girl was coincidental. And as most people do, like, if you see a certain face in your dream, you think, oh, this dream is about that person. Why is this person in my dream? Am I fixating on this person and I don't realize it? And in my experience, that's not the case. I mean, yeah, maybe it is, but if it is, then you know it that way. As opposed to, he knew it wasn't about her per se, but he was so, he just didn't understand why he would be seeing her if the dream wasn't about his feelings for her. But when we unpacked what it was that she represented in a larger way, he immediately was like, oh, okay, yes, I'm losing my hair. And that loss of youth is what she represents to me. It's like he immediately, once that piece of it was lifted away from his eyes, then it was like, oh, okay, yeah, it's not about her at all. It's about my issues. And I think that's usually the case for dream interpretation is when you're dealing with people, it's like you have to be careful that it's not necessarily who it looks like. For me, I will often, like, as I said, Lupita Nyong'o played my cousin, who we'll call Jane. But in my dream, she would say, I named her as Jane. I knew she was Jane. So it didn't matter what she looked like. I knew that she was that person. And that the interaction and the content of the dream had to do with Jane and had nothing to do with her. So that's my, a couple takes that I have on dream interpretation. And anyway, so all that to say, dream interpretation has always been strong for me, and I know I usually get the quality of the dream is different when it's precognitive. I will usually wake up knowing I have to speak to the person that I had the dream about. When I was working in LA, I knew a guy who'd been one of the creators of the film Underworld, and I had a career message dream for him, and that was an instance where I told him, and he was like, I don't believe in that stuff. And he was, if you know who Terry Crews is, he was someone who's very much like Terry Crews, physically, type-wise, but he has no sense of humor like Terry Crews. And basically the dream was telling him, you're going to get an offer and take this one that's not your usual type of role. He wouldn't have listened to it, and he probably would still never have taken that role because he didn't have much of a sense of humor about himself. And that's an instance where you can't do anything. If you get a message for someone, sometimes I don't even tell people because I just know my relationship with them is such that they're not going to hear it. And I kind of knew when I told him that he wasn't going to hear it. I didn't know his response would be so negative, but anyway. He claimed to be a Christian. I wanted to say, you claim to be a Christian, but you don't believe in dream analysis? It's all in the Bible. Dream interpretation is Old and New Testament. It's all through there. But, those arguments are pointless. If a person doesn't want to hear it, they don't want to hear it. Change of topic. Now that we've gotten through some woo-woo topics, I'll get to a more woo-woo topic. Even with these experiences, it never even occurred to me to believe in fairies. That's kind of on the border of my belief system, and it just didn't, it didn't occur to me. Until I started watching a wonderful channel, I think it's called the Modern Fairy Podcast. I'll link it, one of her episodes down below. And one of the reasons I watched that is because I had an experience which kind of changed my mind. While I was living in LA, now I don't know if this is a fairy or a gnome, or what was interesting is that it was in LA, and it was, it's about about as concrete as you get. Not where you usually think they're fairies and gnomes. And I'll give you the layout. My apartment had the kind of long, high windows. So, like, in theory, you could undress in front of your window and not be seen by anyone below. Of course, there were buildings across the way, so you still could, but in theory, that could have been it. It was kind of that 1950s architecture. And that was the kind of window that was in my bedroom, and my bed was beneath that window. Outside of that window was the parking lot. Real glamour. The glamour of Hollywood. My apartment overlooked the parking lot. And then the back of another building. There was like the parking lot, a drop down to a walkway next to the building, and then the building that was over there. I had, at that time, I think I had 5 cats and 2 dogs in the apartment with me. I had a German Shepherd and an Old English Sheepdog. One morning when I was awake, but I hadn't gotten out of bed yet, and like snooze time, snoozer, on the alarm. I heard a really heavy footfall coming from that other building. Oh, I forgot to say. At the front of that other building, because I was near the corner of that block. So if I walked down the corner and over in front of that building, in the basement of that building was an antique shop where I often purchased things, like a little lamp, little things, because my income was very low. But I really formed a relationship with the owner of that shop. And so he was a little shop, maybe 10 by 20, the size of a bedroom maybe. And then I think the back room was that size again. And it never even occurred to me to think he might have lived there as well in a farther recess. So that was in the kind of the basement of that building, but that building was lower on the hill than we were. So that shop was just around the corner. But so from the direction of that shop, I heard like something kind of land in the driveway. And the driveway wasn't all gravel, the parking lot, but it had enough loose gravel that you would have heard somebody running across. And then I heard dum 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 dum. Pause, like a jump up to my window, and then thump on my bed. And I felt the weight of this thing land on my bed. Now, it's like with my third eye, I knew what this creature looked like. It was a 2-footed creature. I could tell that from the weight. The creature was, I would have said like your traditional gnome in terms of body shape. Like yard gnome, that kind of body shape. And I did not open my eyes because I was afraid that if I looked at it, I was under the covers. I was bound, basically, because I was still under the covers. And I was afraid that if I saw it, it would spark some kind of interaction. Meanwhile, my Old English Sheepdog had jumped up and was going towards the creature. And so in less than a minute, it's like when the land happened and the bed shook, that's when my sheepdog jumped up and started making that, her excited breathing sound, facing it. And very shortly after that, there was a flump off the bed, up to the windowsill, back down, and across the parking lot. So I've thought about this a lot. It's been probably 20 years now. Now, there was a screen and a window in that window. So this couldn't have been a cat or something like that, because it came through the screen in the window. This is some kind of embodied creature that could go pass through things like that. And there was no window sill. So yes, I did have cats. The one time a cat tried to climb up on the window, it fell out and landed on my face, and it gave me a really deep scar by, kicking off once it landed on me. So no, it couldn't have been like one of my cats jumping down. It was about that weight, but it also was very clearly 2 legs. It was 2 feet. And in my mind's eye, I also saw it sort of dressed the way you see garden gnomes dressed. Or maybe not with a hat necessarily, but so I had a really clear third eye vision of this creature. And so it was interesting. I knew that my sheepdog had scared it away. Side note, that was the same way my sheepdog would react when there were earthquakes. I experienced a couple rolling earthquakes, and she would typically jump up because my bed would be moving. She would typically jump up and have kind of a happy, excited response to them. Thankfully, I never experienced a bad earthquake. But anyway, so it was the same kind of response. And that was the verification for me, the fact that my dog was seeing this creature. Only recently had and because I was thinking I wanted to submit this story to this podcast, and she likes it to be a video. Only recently, as I've been thinking about this, I was thinking, why would that have happened? And I'm thinking now, it's probably that something that I bought, and I have an idea, and it was an Art Nouveau lamp that I bought, and I think that was it. That's something, and he had to fix it because it was broken. The guy who owned the shop had to fix it. It had been there for a long time, broken because no one had been interested in it. And then when I expressed interest, he fixed the wiring. It's kind of one of those shadow lamps of a naked woman, so the light shines behind, so you see the silhouette of a woman. I have a pretty strong feeling that lamp is what it was after. Some of the other things, he would get knockoff jewelry from some of the television shows. So that's the other kind of thing that I would get from him. But that lamp was one of the few historic items that I got from him. Now, there was a little more. I lived in the Hollywood Hills. There are some parks around there. There was a little more greenery in the area, but that was still a very concrete area. So not at all where you would think to find fairies and gnomes. But that changed my mind about that, although I still didn't think about it very much. But I've been watching that Modern Fairy podcast, and they were talking one time about fairy traps and the leaves that twirl. And it happened that afternoon, I was taking something out to the trash can outside. We live in the woods. And it was slightly windy, so there was some rustling in the leaves. But about 10 feet from where the trash can was, to my left, there was one leaf that was just twirling in circles. Twirling in circles. And that's very typical. Well, everything around it was still. So you can't say there was a big air current there because it was just this one leaf. And as I saw that, having armed myself with knowledge from this podcast, I said, okay, I see you. And I went ahead and did what I needed to do, and I turned back around and it was still twirling. It was non-stop twirling while everything around would like blow and stop or blow and stop. This was just a non-stop, like somebody doing this with a twig so that the leaf was just twirling and twirling. And so then when I was done, I turned around, I started to leave, I turned around and looked directly at the leaf. I said, I see what you're doing, and if you keep doing that, I'm going to have my wishes. And it stopped. It didn't like stop and start again, it just stopped. My ghost experiences or spirit experiences, aside from my grandmother, my father's mother, because she was dead when I had that dream. My mother's mother was alive when I had that dream about her. I know there are more, but the one that I remember most strongly is I was spending the night at the home, like the family home of a boyfriend. Although he was breaking up with me, I think, and I wasn't getting the message. But it would be hard to tell. He was so dysfunctional. We dated for about 6 months and he never even kissed me. Seriously. And this was as adults, you know. Now, we had worked together part of that time, so it wasn't all relationship. It was getting to know each other. But still. But at this point, I think, I don't know why he brought me to spend the night there at their house, but then he put me in a different room from his bedroom. And they had a large standard collie that kind of had free run of the house. And there was, it was a smaller room that there was a sewing machine in it, and then a rocking chair, not too far from the bed, 2 or 3 feet, 4 feet from the bed. And then, like if I'm sitting in the bed, the rocking chair was there, the door was there, and the bed was this way, so that if the dog came in and stood there, it would be right next to where the rocking chair was. So all through the night, sorry, I had to pause for a minute. So all through the night, I kept hearing what I thought was the dog coming in and standing there and looking at me. Because I would have asked the dog to just jump up in bed with me. But every time I turned around, the dog wasn't there. I thought, how could it have gotten out? I got to the point where I was like really quick in turning around, but I mostly had my back to that. Because for some reason I was sleeping facing the wall. And then I think I did turn around, and then I got to the point, so I could just open my eyes, and whenever I felt it, and the dog wasn't there. And I kept wondering, why is the dog pushing the rocking chair? So then when I woke up, I told him about it, and he said, oh, that was my grandmother. That used to be her room. And I was furious with him. I just said, you put me in that room knowing that this happens. I was not the first person that had experienced her sitting in the rocking chair while they were asleep. And I said, you put me in that room knowing this, and you didn't warn me. First of all, you just put me in that room, period, and you didn't warn me. So that was the end. It wasn't, I'm not even sure. Yeah, I think that was the end. That was the end. So those are, I know I've had other spirit encounters, but they're not springing to mind right now. And I don't work with spirits or call up spirits, so that's not, they're not invited in. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting. Maybe I'll put a hashtag on this and ask you to share some of your experiences in these realms. Or just hope you enjoyed listening. Thanks.